So good morning, dear friends. That was a lovely sit. I almost feel like it would be wonderful to just spend the rest of our time together doing just that. It felt so good. So this morning, I wanted to talk a little bit about the practices that Thay's given us that can help us to understand and to respond skillfully to the situation that we find ourselves in. The wisdom that's been handed down to us is I've been a Dharma teacher for 17 years, and this whole situation that we're in, I feel, has really helped me to deepen my practice quite a bit. I think that we're all called upon to do that now. And the longer I practice, the more I find I need to learn. And the more transformation and healing I find need to be done. So I hope that I can offer you some of Thay's teachings this morning that can help you do that as well. I'd like to start off, Wendy, if you don't mind, with one sound of the bell. And so that's one of the practices that we have, which is to invite a bell and to breathe 3 times to our belly and come back to ourselves. Another practice that we have is to sit just like we did together and to just stop the chatter, all of the monkey mind. The first teaching of the Buddha after he attained enlightenment was on the 4 Noble Truths. And the first noble truth is that suffering exists. And I don't know that there's anybody on the planet right now that isn't quite aware of the fact that definitely lots of suffering exists. And I think that what we're seeing arise from the situation that we're in really invites us to go to the second noble truth, which is the causes of suffering. And in our 4th mindfulness training, it says that we need to get to the root cause of suffering before we can transform and heal. And we need to look at ourselves, that we need to be able to transform and heal the suffering in ourselves. That really helps us to understand and develop compassion for other people. James Baldwin said, I imagine people cling to their hate so strongly because once the hate is gone, they'll have to deal with their pain. And so when we see the divisiveness, when I look at the situation that we're in now, and you see the enormity of the suffering, when I try to get to the root cause, what I can see is a real ignorance of our state of interbeing. That, and this is what it's led to. The Buddha said, when causes and conditions are sufficient, things manifest. When they cease to be sufficient, things cease to manifest. And it's the logical outcome. Whatever seeds in our consciousness we water, that's what manifests in the mind. And for us, it seems a whole lot of seeds of separation, of duality, of dualistic thinking, of which leads to the 3 poisons that the Buddha talked about, the hatred, greed, and ignorance. When we cannot see our state of interbeing, those poisons manifest. And Thich Nhat Hanh in 1966, when he formed our order, he called it the Order of Interbeing, because he knew. And like I said, the longer that I practice, the more astonished I am at the wisdom that he's given us. So in 1966, he knew that when he was looking at the root cause of difficulties, he could see that it was our total ignorance of our state of interbeing. He named our order the Order of Interbeing. He named the first book on the 5 trainings for a future to be possible. For us to continue to survive as a species, we are going to need to be able to deeply experience our state of interbeing. That's just the way it is. And just about everything in our culture encourages us to be fiercely individual. And we can see now that we're paying a very high price, for that. We have the pandemic, and the pandemic has brought up fear of death. It's brought up separation, trauma, economic disaster, fear of survival. It's brought up, I think, at the very core, it's brought up a sense of powerlessness. And we look at the racism. All of the inequities, all of the injustices have been laid bare, I think. No, maybe not all of them, but a whole lot have been laid bare by this whole situation that we're in. And the racism that's become glaringly apparent, the systemic racism, where does it come from? It comes from the hatred, the greed, the ignorance of our interbeing. It comes from that sense of duality, dualistic thinking, them and us, always creating them and us, always looking at I, me, and mine. And again, the Buddha taught us that we have that manas consciousness, basically the ego, that interprets everything we take in through our 5 senses and our mind. All of our experiences get interpreted through manas consciousness, which is the part that interprets everything as about being about me. It's all about me. And that's really a distortion. So those of us who are practitioners need to be able to recognize that, whoops, there I go again. I need to readjust the lenses because that's a misperception. And Thay tells us when we look deeply at any difficulty and we get to the root of it, we find that there is a misperception. And the misperception in terms of our perceiving things as being separate or perceiving us as being separate is that at the root of that, there's a total misperception that we are interconnected absolutely, and there's no escaping it. That when we are suffering under the illusion of separateness, we think that what we do doesn't affect other people. We think that it's all about I, me, and mine. As long as I get enough, as long as I have trust funds for my kids, everything's all set. I'm all set. And the thing I really get excited about is that when I study, we're in our sutra study group, we're studying the sutra on the 8 realizations of great beings. And in that sutra, such so happens that today we're on the 6th realization. The great beings had 8 realizations. We're on the 6th one. And all of them are totally relevant to the times that we're living in. It's a little bit disheartening. In one way, it's encouraging. In another, it's disheartening to think that it's been 2,600 years and we're still dealing with the same things. But the 6th realization is the awareness that poverty creates hatred and anger, which creates a vicious cycle of negative thoughts and activity. When practicing generosity, bodhisattvas consider everyone friends and enemies alike, as equal. They do not condemn anyone's past wrongdoings, nor do they hate those who are presently causing harm. This is like flying to the other side of the moon for a whole lot of us. That, but it's that poverty creates hatred and anger. Yet we live in a way that creates poverty. And we need to be waking up to that idea of how can we share what we have, and also above and beyond sharing what we have, to look deeply at the systemic causes of poverty. How has it been set up so that some people have a whole lot and some people have almost nothing? It was fascinating. I heard a beautiful talk given by a man from the Lakota Sioux tribe. His name is Teokasin Ghost Horse. And he was talking about the Lakota language and the differences between English and the Lakota. And in English, it's set up so it's all about I need, I want, I. In the Lakota language, it's set up based on appreciation, and it's all we. He talks about Descartes. Thay talked about Descartes quite a lot. Thay would say, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And Thay said, I think, therefore I'm not present. Because what he noticed was, as soon as he'd start thinking, his mind was someplace else and his body was here. In the Lakota, they say, we thank, therefore we are. And you'll notice that it's we thank, and it's appreciation. Instead of looking for what I don't have, to be grateful for what I do. Whole other world. The other piece that really was so beautiful to me when we talk about interbeing is that in the Lakota language, there's no way to say, I want to become something. They don't have that capacity in the language. And when I heard that, I just thought, wow, I had to just stop. I've been using it in my meditations, actually, to sit with that. What would that be like to be born thinking that, it's, I'm connected to everything and everybody, that I don't have to become anything. I already am what I need to become. Thay wrote a calligraphy that says you already are what you want to become. And Westerners rail at that and say, he didn't know me very well. I could have filled him in and let him know that I had a lot of room for improvement here. And no. But imagine from birth to have no possibility in the language for self-hatred. Of your interconnection with everything. They don't have a word for environment. Thay has always told us we shouldn't speak about the environment as if it's something outside of ourselves. We are the environment. We are one cell in this big organism. And in the Lakota language, they don't have a word for environment because they are the environment. And then when I heard that, I remembered being in college and having an art therapist come to our class and show us. She had been working on Indian reservations and on in public schools. And when she's working with Native American kids, she would ask them to do a self-portrait. Well, when she worked with the public school kids, she'd ask them to do a self-portrait, and they'd fill up the whole paper with a picture of themselves. And when she worked with the Native American kids, she would ask them to do a self-portrait, and they would do a landscape. It would be a picture of a landscape, and in the bottom corner, there might be a little stick figure of themselves. And when I heard this man from the Lakota tribe talking, I thought, wow, what would that be like to be born with the total awareness of interbeing and to live your life from that perspective? That's what Thay is trying his best to help us to do through the practices that we have. One thing that this Lakota teacher said was, he said that we'd have to, trying to remember, he said that in the West, we think that our job is to save Mother Earth. And he said, what we need to know is Mother Earth doesn't need saving. Mother Earth is just fine. And Mother Earth is going to continue long after we're probably going to be gone. She's fine. What we need to do is to recognize that she's trying to save us. And so I look at that and I think, what came to me was the sense of arrogance that is built also into that kind of fierce individualistic conquerors of the earth and saviors of everything. We're going to save Mother Earth. We're the ones that will save Mother Earth. And that arrogance, I don't know. I think that it's I think that also was part of what Thay's realization was about. That he gave us practices to try to just wrench our fingers away from that clutching to our egocentric selves. And one of the practices that I think demonstrates that so beautifully is our practice of beginning anew. Because the first thing we do, if somebody says or does something that upsets us, we have to spend 24 hours looking at ourselves, looking at what part have I played in this difficulty. That to me was completely revolutionary. I had no training in that at all. That I had been raised to believe if somebody did something hurtful, I should either put on my lawyer outfit and arm myself with facts and win an argument, or I probably would have nothing to do with them ever again and not like them very well. When I came to the practice and had to spend time looking at what part have I played and realizing that we co-create everything, that we always play a part in whatever relationship we're in. But Thay says we spend 24 hours looking at what part have I played in this difficulty. That by itself is very humbling. So we're already beginning to practice humility. And then we have to meet with the person and offer 3 things we appreciate. Here's a person that's hurt us, and we're trying to think of the 3 things we appreciate about them, which immediately softens our heart and which immediately is humbling. And then we have to offer beneficial regret. We have to offer what we found out. When I was sitting with myself for those 24 hours, what I discovered is that I really played a part in this difficulty. I'm so sorry that I was really unskillful. And I realized that I did this, or this, whatever it was. And to me, that is kind of the ultimate in being vulnerable. When you let somebody know they were capable of hurting you, and when you let somebody know that you could see the part that you played in that. So he's given us all these practices to help us get over that powerful conditioning. The thing about listening to the man from the Lakota tribe was to understand the power of language. I never had really thought before about how it colors our perception of ourselves, each other, and everything. How different languages are, and how that can really be powerful conditioning for us. So what Thay has offered us forever is ways to look at what has been my conditioning, what are my habits that I've developed because of it, and how can I transform and heal those things. What's come up now, I don't know about for you, but for me, is dealing with difficult emotions. That he's given us all kinds of practices for doing that. That I have found that in a course of 24 hours, I can experience all 51, I think, of my mental formations. It's not that hard to have everything come up. I've been spending quite a bit of time with Thay's writings on anger, and he has a book called Anger, and he's got another one called Fear. And I find both of those to be very helpful. Um, in the book on anger, uh, it's very interesting because he says, don't fight your anger and don't suppress your anger. Learn the tender way of taking care of your anger and transform it into the energy of understanding and compassion. The tender way of taking care of your anger, and to embrace it like a mother would a child, to look deeply to understand what is this really about. And what he also has told us is that when you scratch the surface, very frequently you find that fear is the soil in which anger grows. And so sometimes it doesn't take me long to go from something I might be angry about. When I really stop and look deeply, I come to fear. What am I afraid of? And anger is a lot, it feels a lot more solid. It feels a lot more stable and confident than fear does. So I think a lot of us like to go there. But the other part is that we tend to have been conditioned to think that compassion is weak. That compassion and understanding, that means you just let yourself be abused. You just let people go doing things that are horrible in the world. And that's a misperception. So he also goes on to say, understanding and compassion are very powerful sources of energy. They are the opposite of stupidity and passivity. If you think that compassion is passive, weak, or cowardly, then you don't know what real understanding or compassion is. If you think that compassionate people do not resist and challenge injustice, you're wrong. They are warriors, heroes, and heroines who have gained many victories. When you act with compassion, with nonviolence, when you act on the basis of non-duality, you have to be very strong. You no longer act out of anger. You do not punish or blame. Compassion grows constantly inside of you, and you can succeed in your fight against injustice. Mahatma Gandhi was just one person. He did not have any bombs, any guns, any political party. He acted simply on the inside of non-duality, the strength of compassion, not on the basis of anger. Human beings are not our enemy. Our enemy is not the other person. Our enemy is the violence, ignorance, and injustice in us and in the other person. When we're armed with compassion and understanding, we fight not against other people, but against the tendency to invade, to dominate, to exploit. Does this sound familiar for what we're dealing with now? The tendency to invade, to dominate, and to exploit. We don't want to kill others, but we will not let others dominate and exploit us or other people. You have to protect yourself. You are not stupid. You are very intelligent and you have insight. Being compassionate does not mean allowing other people to do violence to themselves or to you. Being compassionate means being intelligent. Nonviolent action that springs from love can only be intelligent action. So I think this is very important to understand fierce compassion. And when he talks about taking care of our anger so that it becomes the energy of understanding and compassion, it's using that energy, taking that energy and putting it to good use. It doesn't mean that we sit around feeling compassionate. Thay says compassion is a verb. To sit around feeling compassionate has nothing to do with compassion. True compassion moves us to action, to take some action. And I think that I would like to close. One of the things that I really enjoyed is reading the Book of Joy. It's about a retreat, a week-long retreat with Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. It talks a lot about their conversations, and it's just a total delight. But they talk about the 8 pillars of joy, and one is perspective, humility, humor, acceptance are the first 4. It's to get the proper perspective, to zoom out far enough that we can get over ourselves to really see a situation for what it is. And humility, which we've talked about, humor, I think, is essential if we're going to survive. Um, and acceptance that this is what is right now. And what can I do if I want, if causes and conditions have led to this, what can I do to contribute my part to changing the causes and conditions? And then they talk about the last four are forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. Well, for me, forgiveness is understanding that when somebody has done something to me that is unkind, um, I can look at that. If I look deeply enough to truly understand this person, I come to a place of deep understanding, and there's no blame there. I can look at them and say, wow, they are really suffering. And I can open the door to compassion in my own heart. And so I always feel like that is what forgiveness is to me. It's to come to that place of deep understanding. And then they talk about gratitude, compassion, and generosity. And gratitude, um, like I've said before, that's kind of where I live most of the time. Thay has given us that as well. He says, if you find yourself in the midst of a very challenging situation, it's not to avoid, again, like he said, we don't try to get away from our anger. We don't try to pretend that everything's great. We really try to sit with our anger. We try to sit with whatever difficult emotions arise. And I can say that for me, one of the main ones that have been arising lately, along with anger, irritation, frustration, is sadness, deep, deep sadness. Sadness for our species and the ignorance that we experience. And so gratitude, compassion, and this is the other thing. Thay's always said that suffering is the door to compassion. Suffering is what opens our hearts. That you may think that you're compassionate. I thought I was real compassionate till I got the diagnosis of cancer. And as soon as I had that diagnosis, sitting there, just having heard the news, I immediately felt my heart open to 1 in 8 women in the world that have had that same experience. And before that, I would have said, I have nothing but compassion for people that are suffering like that. But I didn't have the same deep experience of that that I did by suffering myself. That suffering is the door to compassion. And so what I think, I'm left in a place of wonderment, actually, about the situation that we're in, that if it had not been for the pandemic, would we be experiencing the protests that we are experiencing now? Would we, it feels to me like there's a lot of awakening happening. Could it be because everybody had been hurt? Could it be because everybody was traumatized by what's happening? Could it be because everybody was disenfranchised? Could it be because all of the places that we go for distraction were gone? Not all of them, but many of them. There's no baseball, there's no football, there's no basketball, there's no restaurants, there's no movies. The places that we might normally go to and entertain ourselves and keep ourselves busy, maybe people were spending more time paying attention to what's going on, and also to paying attention to their own suffering. And maybe the door to compassion was opened a little bit farther. I don't know. I'm just wondering. Like I said, this is a wonderment for me. 40 million people out of work have more time. All the young people sent home from college. Maybe there's intergenerational conversations happening. I don't know. But it just seems that whatever it was, causes and conditions are sufficient for awakening to be happening. I told some people that I've been an activist since I was 17 years old, and I never had realized going into the whole thing that Martin Luther King said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I had no idea how long that arc was. For everything I would get involved in, I think, well, it's so obvious. Of course, everybody will wake up immediately and see the light, and this will be over in no time. And it's just been so surprising to see how much energy and diligence and time, how many people. So when I watch all these young people that are so determined to stand up to injustice, uh, I see that they're putting their substantial weight to bend that arc. And it makes me very happy that that's happening. And I'm hoping that they can bend it farther than it's been able to be bent so far. And when I saw that, I was not able to be out there because of the situation that I personally am in. But I felt so happy to know that I could see them marching on the backs of Mahatma Gandhi. I could see them marching on the backs of Martin Luther King. I could see them marching on the backs of every single one of us who've ever stood up to injustice and marched before. It's just a beautiful thing to see the continuation, that we need to be sowing lots of positive seeds to see that continue. Ella Baker, the head of SNCC during the Civil Rights Movement, her main thing was to empower young people. And in the song that Sweet Honey wrote about her, it says, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons. We who believe in freedom cannot rest." And I think that to me, that has always been very inspiring, that it takes constant diligence over time. And I think that the other thing we need, number one, like I said, water lots of seeds of joy, that look deeply at the causes and conditions, do what we can to set them right, do what we can to change the structures that have led to the injustice. And I think that it's also really important, just like Thay said, compassion isn't stupid. Compassion requires intelligence. Compassionate action requires intelligence. And I know a lot of us would just love nothing more than to not have anything to do with any of it. It's just overwhelming sometimes. And we need to be aware of our capacity, and we need to honor that. We need to take good care of ourselves. And then we also need to know when we're just hiding. And I think that practicing mindfulness and concentration is absolutely critical right now, because there are lots of attempts to distract us, lots of attempts to keep us completely busy looking at certain things. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We're in the midst of some protests. We're in the midst of the stuff that's happening in Oklahoma today. All this stuff gets thrown up. And in the meantime, what I just learned was that the person that was appointed to head up the United States Global Media Network, which is the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, just fired everybody. That he just took over and fired all of the heads of all of those things, and is going to replace them with his chosen people. And these are people that are Pulitzer Prize winners, everything else. And that happened on Wednesday. Friday, the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York got fired by tweet. He didn't even know it, and he was fired. He was the one that was investigating Rudy Giuliani and some of the things that had been going on in New York. So this is all happening while we're paying attention to all kinds of other things. So this is why I think it's very important. Mindfulness and concentration are really important. And I'm not stating one way or the other whether all these are good things or bad things. That's left up to us to decide. But I think that we do need to be paying attention. It's very, very serious times that we're living in. And so one way or the other, however you get your news, if you Usually reading it's not quite as um, exciting to our limbic systems as listening to people who are fired up themselves. We have mirror neurons that kind of pick up on other people's emotions. So whatever way you can. But I really do invite you to do your best to stay informed and to take skillful action, whatever that is. For me, I write love letters a lot of the time to the folks in Washington and in Rhode Island and encourage them. Sometimes I see that there are loopholes in the law, and I'll say, it'd be good if this were codified into law because it seems like it's a problem. Whatever route you take. And most important of all, and I will just finish with this quote from L.R. Nost, do not be dismayed. We cannot fall into despair. Then we become, we're not able to take action. We're not able to function very well. So we take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in the Dharma, all the practices that I've talked about, take refuge in the Sangha, coming together like this to support each other in our practice, to deepen our capacity for concentration, for mindfulness, to share our insights. It's just incredibly, incredibly nourishing and helping. It supports us in our practice. And so please do not be dismayed. Remember to water lots of seeds of joy. But L.R. Nost says, do not be dismayed by the brokenness of the world. All things break and all things can be mended, not with time, as they say, but with intention. So go, love intentionally, extravagantly, unconditionally. The broken world waits in darkness for the light that is you. So we need to do every single thing we can to be good keepers of our own light. That's why I'm saying always look at what is your capacity. Have nothing but compassion for yourself. This is why in the sutra it says that we don't hate anybody, because if we understand them, there's nothing to hate. We can stop them from causing suffering, but if we hate anybody, we're doing damage to our own consciousness. So we need to be very careful to take very good care of our own consciousness in the midst of all of the tumult that's happening, and to love extravagantly, intentionally, and unconditionally. So I hope I've offered you something that you can put to good use. And thank you so much for being here this morning. It's really, really a wonderful way to begin a Saturday, a beautiful June Saturday, and the solstice, the longest day of the year. So that's great. We have even more hours to experience the joy. Take good care. Joanne, bowing out.